Thank you very much, Maria, and good morning, everybody. Our subject today, the sharing economy and what the hotel business can learn from these new trends and how it can benefit from new trends. Now, the participations here, Markus Bernhardt is right to my side, member of Europcar, used to be with Steigerberger Hotels in the past, so he's also somebody who has a hotel background. His job is to try and look sort of across the fence, so we do a bit more than just the usual things. Right in the middle, we have Robert Wismar, who is a head of Ecole Marketing, a consultancy company primarily offering advice to tourism service providers. And something else which may be interesting for you to bear in mind is that you are on the point of completing a survey which is dealing with the role of the shared economy in detail. Another one of our guests is Michael Hartmann, Senior Executive Advisor of the Lausanne-based Hotel Business Schools. I think you've also almost completed a study which again will look into matters such as we're discussing. You used to be in the hotel business yourself, so the practical experience is present in this panel as well. On the far right, called Nussbaum, the prizeotel CEO. The other gentlemen don't yet know it, but we've discussed it earlier. You will be our agent provocateur this morning. In other words, be a bit provocative, metaphorically kick people somewhere, and basically make sure we have a lively debate. Prizeotel is a small hotel chain as we speak, with hotels in Hamburg and Bremen, if I'm right. Hanover will see an opening in the autumn of this year. So much on the panelists, but let me say a couple also sentences about what we don't want in this panel debate. We don't want a sort of debate which whinges about the unfairness of the world and the world of hotels in particular. We don't want tearful laments. So please don't take that amiss, because I think there's too much lamenting going on in the whole business regarding all sorts of different subjects. Nor do we want debates about legal issues as to whether the various representatives of the sharing economy in the hotel business are actually legal or not, or how to act against them in court and so on. The various hotel associations are dealing with all that. We don't. We would like instead to look at some of the trends where the sharing economy is going to, where it comes from. We'd like to, above all, develop some ideas as to how hotels can not just react to the sharing economy with some delay, but how hotels can take a proactive role in countering this phenomenon. We also want to look beyond the pure hotel business, and wherever appropriate, we'd always like to annoy people. Now, obviously, in the audience, we'd be very happy if you were to involve yourselves at the end of the round, ask your questions and make your comments. I'd be grateful if in the last 10 minutes or so, if you wish to, you will be raise your hands or somehow make me aware that you would like to comment. So, the sharing economy and shared value. Occasionally, we have the impression as if this is a sort of the opposite model of capitalism, but the good one. It's like capitalism for do-gooders. Is that really so, or is the sharing economy simply a new business model for a better world, or is it not? I would like to ask Mr. Wismar about this. I think I agree with Niklas Hohmann, who said that companies and morality have a certain relationship. It's like English cuisine. Everybody talks about it, but it doesn't exist. I do not expect a company like IMG would develop that quickly. The last sum for that company is 20 billion. I don't think that's capitalism for do-gooders. It's a very clearly business-driven idea, very exciting. But the question is, why are they so successful? And that's really why our debate is going to be interesting. Capitalism for the gooders, so definitely a no-no to that. But it is an extension of the business processes we've known so far, yes. Mr. Hartmann, as I said earlier, you also are preparing to release a survey. How do you see this? Shared economy, is that the opposite of what we have, or how would you assess it? I think it's not the opposite. I think it's an evolution, because basically the shared economy always existed, but the enabling technology is around now, which allows to digitize all the supply chain. And that means the shared economy has become a tangible thing. So it's not something completely new. I don't see it as something disruptive either. I think the whole thing is lifestyle as it is lived. Perhaps it should be a bit of a wake-up call for established organizations, because it does open up opportunities for great creativity and therefore for further development. But I think this trend for the sharing economy that we see reflected in areas which have nothing to do with the hotel business, for example. We see younger people doing different things. I mean, when I was a young lad, a car was the first thing you were desperate to have. I mean, nowadays, people don't really care anymore. So maybe the whole thing is related to demographic development, social trends. So that's a question to every one of you. Is that so? It certainly has to do with developments. Looking at Airbnb, look at the press releases from 2007 until today, you will find initially there's always a very interesting aspect focused on, namely contact with locals. So the immediate contact with locals for tourists, that's very much at the forefront of things. The backpackers have been focusing on that since the 1960s and 70s. It's been their central issue. I don't prove anything. I can prove the value of a destination by making sure that destination can be sort of socially perceived in a way that makes the tourist socially aware, so that makes it a different type of tourism. Today, this is still there, although industrialized. I'd like to comment briefly. I think the debate is something which is always linked to the value of a brand, because we live in an age where we have a diffusion of brands. I think there is indeed this sort of diffusion or dilution, because throughout history, brands gave people a certain element of safety, as it were, of reliance on something. A brand is a promise, quote unquote. Now the sort of safety aspect, the reassurance of a brand by providing a bit of a ring fence is no longer there. We now have an identity online profile which exists for everybody in the world. And access to all of this is so fast that the sort of joy in communicating with people and trying out new things and, experiencing something is actually a new lifestyle. And interestingly enough, there is this whole community issue. Interestingly enough, people react differently in their own community than they would if they were on their own. So they actually adapt to the behavior of individual group members in the community. And I think future marketing purposes will have to actually work on that from a leverage point of view. So the idea of using brands to protect yourself, that's getting less important. While at the same time we see there is a new sense of belonging to something or another, and there's a great urge to experience something and to share news with other people, maybe with members of your own community. That's one of the greatest sort of reasons which the hotel business needs to contend with as a motivation. You and Europcar, you obviously have a very strong brand. You, Mr. Nussbaum, prizeotel, you are on the point of building a brand. Can we say that brands no longer play the sort of role they used to? I've recently seen a survey which said that the Generation Y trust a booking platform more than they trust individual hotel brands. So I think Airbnb will have to build that trust in the first place, because people are still a bit unsure. They don't know what to expect when you get somewhere. And actually, you get what you got. I remember when I was a traveller, you go somewhere where there isn't a public loo, you go to McDonald's because you know that the loos are going to be clean and everything will work. But I do believe that the whole brand issue and the issue of those people who can act as multipliers for the brand is quite an important issue. Looking at the number of rooms Airbnb is renting these days, I think there's 156,000 or so in their portfolio. Looking at Hilton hotels, how many rooms they rent, 620,000 roughly. So I have an idea of the scale involved. And that also tells us the impact on the web, looking at search engines, for example. But let's assume Airbnb as well as other hotels. I mean, how many hotels does a hotel business have, and how many hotels have different platforms and portfolios? And these platforms don't need to deal with the operative business of a hotel. They only look after the platform about how to make things convenient, usability, user-friendliness, how to improve things. And I think this sort of effect is huge and has been long underestimated in the business. We haven't really taken it seriously, and now it's catching up with us. I think the brand for us is still very important. It's certainly something we're building on, but the brand on its own is no longer something which will help us to achieve progress in the future. We have to really offer our customers new things. We have to go more towards what they want. So I think the whole car rental business has understood very early on what the shared economy is, because we have all these car sharing programs. And there are only two ways of dealing with that. Either you fight it or you try to embrace it actively. And I think companies like ours do something here. We have got joint venture with Mercedes-Benz. That's the Car2Go idea. And we've got Ecole. We bought this company that's also very active in car sharing for fleets and fleet management. So we're trying to take a proactive role here, working with our customers, with our environment and doing what they're doing. Let me say another thing about this. When you know that the city of Paris, 48% of the inhabitants of Paris no longer have their own car. I mean, just sort of bear this in mind. It's an amazing fact. But given this, the sharing economy is increasingly important for a variety of different reasons. But there's certainly huge potential in that. From a business point of view, it's potential that is waiting for us to be exploited. Very briefly, if somebody books a room, for example, or wants to overnight somewhere, what are the criteria? 3. Location, price, reviews, very clearly. You know, what sort of reviews have people written about this accommodation? That's exactly what they're doing. I've got local hosts with Airbnb. They're telling me, you know, how to get around a city, how to get a decent meal. And if I go around in a hotel and I say, where can I get a really good espresso, or where can I get the best pizza in town? Well, I don't think the receptionist will give me very good answers. It's simply a fact. So you think it's more likely, and that's basically what I was getting at anyway, the importance of brands, is that really decreasing? If I'm looking at some of my kids, my own children, brands still are very important for my kids. Or maybe it's more a case of trust in certain hotel brands having been lost. Because that's how I interpret what you said a moment ago, Mr. Nussbaum. The hotel business or the hotel brand no longer does what I expect as a guest. I think people look for things differently. As we've heard, the TripAdvisors and things like that, if they have a critical mass, and the reviews, that is the key for much of the process that chains need. I don't want to be too heretical, but in the hotel business, we're still focused too much on check-ins and check-outs. I mean, like, I do the best thing while we have the guest on the spot, on property, as we call it, which from a point of view of our digital, highly transparent, technology-enabled world is lethal, that sort of mindset. And if you're checking out the web and look at things like Booking.com, Expedia, and so on, lots of hotels and the way they present themselves are like a sort of brochure with lots of colourful pictures to leaf through. So it's not really targeted the way it's structured. It's not something that gives people the motivation, the kick to book there. So I think here the brands, well, people no longer look for the brands to the same extent they used to, because obviously seeing the way the brands market themselves, and I'm very cautious how I put this, it may not quite hit or quite reflect what hotels actually offer. Sort of an individualized, a personalized business traveler. I've read something in a big hotel saying that, they've got conferences which they host for thousands of people. How are they supposed to provide customized service for the business traveler? I mean, you can't do that. It's a question of authenticity. What is it that people are looking for? And maybe people rely more on their peers in their own communities and what they say. As far as that's concerned, I would like to go back to the brand issue, because I think it's quite interesting that we talk about this. I mean, is there still such a thing like brands and Airbnb? I mean, that is one. I mean, I think you've got a huge brand, a very strong brand. But what's really important is it, supplements things. How does that brand work? What does it do differently from other brands? And basically, the brand is doing something differently because you focus on this community aspect. Well, I must say that community is always a bit of a vague term. It says everything and nothing. Smaller communities like Airbnb, that something really exciting. It sets you apart from hotels, because at Airbnb you've got a sort of mutuality in the review system, and you find out who's given this. In the hotel business, it's a more one-sided review system. Sadly. Well, I wouldn't say sadly necessarily, because I think what you're doing at Airbnb is an almost Calvinist type of principle, because this sort of mutuality in reviews enforces a different sort of behavior. If you rate me badly and I've got an apartment, I won't be able to sell that apartment. So I've got to make sure that the reviews I get for my apartment are good ones. Equally, I try to review my own customers well, because if they get me to write a bad review about them, they won't get the best apartments themselves. So basically, we're getting into a system which I think is highly dubious, because all these comments, the reviews, as we know in the hotel business and often see rather painfully, is sort of public opinion. A rubbish review is pretty bad to get away. You have to also prove that somebody is rubbish on purpose sometimes. And, I got 2 comments. Somebody says my host was not a nice person. But, I mean, you assess that person in the way you review the person, not the actual, say, car or how clean it was or the horsepower it has or whatever. But here I review an individual. And looking at the legal basis for all this, I must say, honestly, I find that it's a bit something which we should give some thought to. Do we really want this or not? Well, I think the whole review thing is very interesting, particularly from a community point of view. What makes a review important for a hotel business or for somebody renting anything? Because these reviews are authentic. I know with Airbnb, I can start with my friends. My friends are all there too, and I can see which locations, which rooms they've reviewed. Obviously, I believe my own mates much better, because I know how they think. They probably have the same taste that I have. They know, and I know them, so I can trust them much better than if I go on the website of Holiday Check saying, this is the hotel, they've got 250 great reviews, but I don't know who's done those reviews. I mean, tastes differ, and I have no idea whether the people who rated that hotel or this hotel well are like me in their way of thinking. So the authenticity of reviews is absolutely crucial. And demand streams can be channeled through those reviews, so that in advance I actually start with a positive image. Mr. Bernhardt, my impression is that in the hotel business, something like Airbnb and the success they have in their shared economy models probably would have been unthinkable without review portals. Now, you have collected quite a bit of experience over time with the sharing economy and with what you offer yourself. How important are these review portals for you? Obviously, these review portals are quite important for us too, and yet other features are more important in that area. The car rental industry differs from the hospitality industry, that goes without saying, but the most important criteria in favor of car sharing are accessibility, where do I find the vehicle, and security. These 2 matter most, and everything else is secondary, maybe very nice, and we ask about it, but customers really don't care about that so much. They want to see that the car is 200 meters from where they live. They can see it on the app. They can go straight to that vehicle, open the door, get in, drive off. The vehicle has to be maintained. It's got to be secure. There's a sort of check on that in the vehicle. So there are all sorts of other criteria. So it makes it rather difficult to compare car sharing and hospitality. When it comes to the traditional rental car issue, the situation is rather different because the whole process is different. And the customer segment is as well. So we do differentiate very clearly as to whether somebody is a sort of long-term person who rents it for a long period, or somebody who wants a car for 2-3 days, or if somebody within an urban environment simply needs a car for a trip from A to B. So there are different segments and accordingly different reviews. That's actually quite exciting. You said a moment ago that you had set up a new startup where somebody puts a car when going on a travel at the airport and can then rent the car. That's a personal car. So as far as that's concerned, you need to have an effect on the behavior of whoever rents the vehicle. You need to have reviews in order to generate the sort of behavior you wish people to show, or not just those who rent the car, but also the owner who leaves the car to be rented. It's a bit similar to on a B. I've got the apartment here. My risk is somebody will completely demolish the apartment I let to them. So how do I administer that risk? I only do that on the basis of the reviews of the persons who want to rent that apartment. If somebody thinks I cheat, then they give a bad review of me, and I think that's what is inherent to the system, isn't it? Yes, and it's similar to what we do, but we go a step further. We're doing a check before making the vehicle available and making sure that it fulfills road safety regulations, that the technical state of the art is there. If those things don't work, then we don't rent the car. But I mean, that's still the review. I mean, we must make sure that a non-smoking car will not be driven by a smoker and so on. Yes, certainly. I would like to step in here briefly and ask a question to all of you, which would bring us back to our B&B and the new competition coming from the digital business, especially in the hotel business. Any one of you tried our B&B yet? Or let's say a B&B is just a sort of cliche which stands for the whole shared economy phenomenon. I imagine you use the car sharing idea that you're running yourself, but Airbnb, how about it? Do you use that sort of service? Is it a question to everybody or to us? No, just to you. Because I really, what I was getting at was, if you allow me, obviously, some things that you're saying here are a bit theoretical in character. So it gets even more abstract because of the many English terms you're using yourself. I don't want to annoy anybody. I know this is an international sector, and that's fine, but let's be a bit more down to earth. Well, down to earth, I fly to New York, look at things. I'd rather try and make a based loft for $350 instead of spending $300 on a tiny room, definitely want of modernization, where you have an old-fashioned dirty shower curtain. That's what people don't want, and I think this is what makes a difference. If we're looking, ITB, for example, was always a guarantee for having hotels filled. How many hotels are still have vacancies today? And even our colleagues here, gosh, we're here for almost 7 days. And we've got a loft in Kreuzberg, 2 of us, and we've got 120 square meters available. The same price as going to this or that hotel brand where I find pretty awful mattresses that have seen better days. I would be surprised if people do that. What about the other gentlemen? Don't all try to answer at once. Obviously, I've tried that because I've been interested in that phenomenon for many years, but I've tried it out also because I've done a lot of interviews with Airbnb individuals, people who are running Airbnb, because obviously that is what I need to know to see what sort of motivation do people have when they rent an apartment, for example. Because in the sharing field in general, you have some people who, their kids have left, they need to have some sort of social contact, so they rent a room. These are the sort of 1-2 bed rentals in Berlin. You've got a lot of those. Or there are people who've got a holiday home somewhere, a cottage, because they need additional income. Then there are lots of people who've got quite a few of these places because they're building up a company. These are the 3 most common things, and I think they will always be around in the sharing economy. And one of the areas conflicts with the hotel business, that's very clear. That's a sort of decentralized hotel, quote unquote, which people don't like seeing because, as I say, it actually violates the rule of competition with the hospitality business. The other areas you should know from the history of hotels, because you had that around the turn of the century, where you had that too, 18th to 19th century. After the Second World War again, you got these huge apartments where the widows of civil servants had these huge apartments, and they started with small hotels. We had that even in the former GDR, where B&Bs were rented out that way. It's a sort of phenomenon which only disappeared once the hotel and hospitality sector became more industrialized. So actually it's nothing new, and I agree with you on that. And yet it is new because there are very new features and new methods, and because it covers a new need that tourists have, and that is basically to be close to the city. Let's get back to my original question. I won't let you get out of it. Every single one of you will have to answer. As far as I'm concerned, and my own staff, we test the system all the time, because we are offering cooperation with home sharings as well. We're saying, if you do home sharing, do car sharing as well, because the two things can be interlinked, and we see that's a huge business opportunity for us. To know how it works, of course, you need to see for yourself. How does it work? What sort of booking impact will it have? Where are these apartments? Let's say I use Paris as an example, the city where I live, where our company is headquartered, and that's exactly what we're doing in Paris. We go through all sorts of apartments there. And I agree with what Mr. Nussbaum said. You've got 53 square meters with a view to the Eiffel Tower, and you end up paying less than in the Mandarin Oriental Hotel, which is perhaps 2 minutes away. And you've got beautiful Art Deco house and everything else you can imagine. So it's something which enhances the experience of being there. Obviously, there's not so nice side about this as well. I don't know what other home sharings are like, but what we have in Paris is, of course, something which completely lacks service. So you arrive and the fridge is empty. That's fine, but there is a next generation home sharings that goes into the digital field a bit more and say, right, we offer you exactly that. You book and we make sure your fridge is full. If you make us a list of the things you need, and we have that waiting for you when you come. So that's the trend now. And if you want to stay in business, you've got to face up to that. You have to see how you can really make something of that. And this is exactly the reason why we cooperate with home sharing companies on that basis. And we do so successfully. It's not something we've done for a long time. We've done it for 6 or 7 months. But we see that people who book home sharings also have certain demands as far as mobility is concerned. And car sharing companies, they're the right partner for them. Yeah, I heard. I have to answer too, I know. I myself haven't overnighted there yet, although I have viewed some of those together with hotel chains. And that's decided you not to spend the night in the home sharing, or what? No, I just wanted to look at them from a different sort of angle, because we considered, as you rightly said, what sort of additional services can we provide. Let nobody believe that Airbnb will stop where it is now. In other words, getting back to the digital value chain, we're only right at the beginning of the whole development. It's got a lot to do with the supplementary services the micro-entrepreneur, in inverted commas, can add. It has a lot to do also with the segments that nobody has tackled yet. And quite irrespective of business travel, I think there's a lot that is still possible to be exploited. We still have some segments to be filled in the hotel business. I'm sure we're talking about a bottom-up approach here, absolutely certain. So things will continue.
Before we come on to that point, which was supposed to be the major theme here, what can the hospitality business learn from all this? I think this is quite a good transition. I'd like to venture a few hypotheses about why the hospitality business is so vulnerable to new models, or so open to them, quite apart from trends like digitization and these big issues that we can't influence anyway. Of course, the hotel trade tries to resolve everything through price, normally in the sense that the prices come down until they manage to fill all the beds again. Second hypothesis, there's a trend in the hotel business, as we've been talking about brands, to standardize the product a great deal. There's a famous luxury hotel that actually advertises by saying, we have this little leaflet that every member of staff, whether gardener or CEO, carries around, which tells them how they're supposed to speak to guests and how they're supposed to behave. Rules and procedures. And this is being overdone, rather, so that the human side of the hotel business, response to the guest, is a little neglected. The third hypothesis is that these days there are hotel concepts that are new, are successful. I'm thinking of things like 25 hours, for example, which I think reflect some of the things that we have spoken about here. Being close to the local people, for example, being a host to visitors in town, that they have a better grip on these things, or at least they're more contemporary, and that's why they're so successful. Could I ask all of you now to tell me whether you think these are correct arguments? Whoever would like to start, don't all rush. And not all at once, please. Those 3 questions are... Sorry, says the speaker, the little thing just came out of my ear. Apart from that, if your sound is disrupted, let us know. No, it's fine. I think you had 3 questions. The first was about price management. Was that really such a good idea? Secondly, standardization and industrialization. And the third line of argument is how I manage people. I would interpret it that way. I'm going to start with the last one. Well, of course, that's your core business, isn't it? Well, it is now. If you see that outside the world is changing in terms of lifestyle and community building, and this is happening outside your door, and you don't empower your employees and you carry on working top-down, I'm not criticizing anyone here, but that's normally the case, you're going to have a problem, because this empowerment of the people who are actually responsible for the operations, if they are not empowered, if they are not enabled, you won't have anyone who does a little bit more than what it says in the rules and procedure. In our quality assessment, we hold interviews with people at fairly top level, and we hear, we need people with passion, we need service samurais, whatever they are. In this context, the big question is, of course, you need a certain amount of natural courtesy to work in this building. There's no doubt about that. But I think that as management, we don't use all the options open to us. Of course, you have to manage a 40-room hotel differently from a 1,000-room hotel. You're bound to have a degree of standardization there and a kind of McDonaldization. Yes, but the question is whether your guests sense that standardization and whether they suffer or whether they feel that it's a little bothersome, it gets on their nerves. I don't know if it gets on their nerves, but I think this personification is a little bit difficult, or customization. In a luxury hotel, you get the feeling, I have a choice. I can decide whether I want to interact with other people all the time or whether I want my quiet, my peace and quiet. It's a very important choice. So that personalization is about recognition. It's about me being recognized for the kind of person I am. And I would like to have a choice about what I want and what I don't want. If you're talking about pricing, I think there are 2 sides to it. It's a blessing and it's a curse. I learned this at the investment conference. In future, loyalty members will be given different rates depending on what category they're in. But it seems there's going to be more of that in the future. What exactly the objective of that is, I'm not quite sure, but there do seem to be new platforms being established there. I hope we're not misunderstanding each other. I wasn't really arguing against that approach to management, yield management, but perhaps what I was trying to do was illustrate the lack of imagination you often get in the hospitality trade if all you can do is respond through price. Perhaps we'll let the others have a chance. Historically speaking, that is a fact, though. And the last 20 years haven't been that different. Whether we're looking at 1996, 1997, when HRS started offering services in the internet, and users sat there saying, "Oh, who's cheaper? Who's cheaper? Online. I can get lower prices online." And the hotel started saying, "Oh, that's the way to get guests, to lower the price." And other people were out there obviously playing games with their computers, getting the rates to fall because they were suggesting demand. And of course then, when people talk about their budgets, they say, "Oh, GMs and so forth will say, HRS, really strong factor, fantastic." And we have to be careful about this because we need to use other distribution channels. And now, of course, they all respond by saying price, 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 price. What happens? I need market share, so I'll lower my price. But that way you don't talk about service delivery and quality and so forth. On your second line of argument, I don't think we can't just run management by reading a load of folders full of procedures and trying to do micromanagement and trying to describe processes. The young people who work for us aren't interested in that kind of thing. You explain to them hundreds of times exactly how to do everything, but no one says to them why they have to do it like that. I think in most cases, they just switch off. I can't help these young people develop if I just tell them the rule for the procedure. I suppose that's what those samurais are all about. They can't use their own heads, their own brains, make their own choices. And the third thing, this was a really cool brand developed by really cool people with an authentic story to tell, and they're not shareholder value driven. They actually look to see how their claims are reflected in Wall Street prices all the time. I think that's the difference. From my point of view and the way the hospitality trade used to be, I would say the big difference that we see in our industry is, of course, we face this price war, but we need to distinguish ourselves. One is through innovation and the other is the business model. Business models are often outdated and they have to be replaced, otherwise things won't work. And if I ignore that fact, I have no chance. So speaking for us, innovation is important. There are startup companies in the sharing economy who work together with big partners in the corporate sector, whether it's Siemens or other companies, who are ready to pay a bit more because they want an innovative solution that will make it easier for them to drive their business. So if innovation means things are being driven forward, then you have very different opportunities for price management. Innovation isn't just about printing a new glossy brochure and changing the rooms from red to yellow. It needs a bit more than that. Yes, one point here is a very interesting one. I think that first argument that you developed about pricing, the digital media have given us transparency, of course. We're familiar with the game playing that you talked about. So the pressure in the market, the budget hotels, it's a big misunderstanding to suggest that that's only because people think that cheap is sexy. If you bear in mind that 20% of the population of Germany don't travel because they don't have the money, that's not because they're miserly, it's because there's a lack of financial resources available, and perhaps mobility isn't top of their priority list. Now, you can perhaps open up that market by offering them sofas. Pricing is complex. It's not just about a company made by a company. it's up to the market and what market segment you are operating in. That's one thing. And the second thing that I think is really interesting about this perspective on hotels, of course, hotels lack imagination to some extent because hotels have become a part of asset management, property management. If you look at where the hotels are, this is where you have a lot of property asset management, real estate management. And of course, the operator is vulnerable to market pressures. I'm sure that's a problem, the fact that real estate management is such a big factor for hotels in places like that. But of course, a hotel is a cultural product. And a cheap hotel is also a cultural product. Look at all the different hostels that are on offer and who they attract. And I'd like to move on there to things that you talked about. Employees, of course, you're quite right. The hotel is a kind of microcosm. It might be a destination in itself, but location, location, location is so important. The hotel has a certain facade, which is supposed to suggest a certain lifestyle, but you have a modernization process underway in the hotel, which means that there'll be fewer and fewer employees. Marriott starting by getting rid of their front office. A lot of services will simply no longer be offered in the hotel. There are mobile solutions to these services, and then the kind of thing that used to characterize a hotel gradually vanishes. Those services are moved out into the surroundings, and then you get Airbnb, and of course, they're bound to profit from this because you're living in a community, because every block of flats is a community. Or you'll be living out on the street. You're not locked away in a hotel. You're in the town. And you can respond the way you would at home. You're a tourist. You have the freedoms that a tourist has. And there, by adopting these industrialization procedures, hotels are opening up a divide between these two different approaches. Okay, so let's come to your role. What would you recommend to the hotel business? We've heard there are new business models out there. We've heard innovation in products and services is important. What do you think they should do, or what are you doing to counter these trends? Just briefly on that. Yes, in Japan there are robots now that run coffee shops. But to be serious, the hospitality trade is a people trade. I don't think that things have to change radically in hotels. If you have a team and someone is standing there at reception, sooner or later check-in is going to be obsolete because people can do this online on their smartphones. We won't talk now about police registration and all that, but it's going to gradually become communication in the team is going to change. Everyone on the team is a communicative link between the guest and the brand. In Bremen, we monitor social media quite clearly, and we had a guest some time ago who was really upset that he couldn't get a latte macchiato with soya milk near the station. We monitor this. We look to see what guests come to what hotels, and we've develop profiles to see who goes where. So what happens? He comes into the hotel and someone on the team says, hey, you know what? In the station, we've just set up this new bar, latte macchiato with soya. Would you like one while you're waiting to check in? And this guy will send that out on social media. They'll say, hey, there's this hotel near the station. They actually do latte macchiato with soya milk. Come along, guys. So you need this check-in, check-out process needs to become a communicative chain. It's really difficult because the people who have the most contact with the guests in our hotels at the moment are the worst paid. Well, that's not going to work. Role number 2, what can we learn from Airbnb? I looked to see what I think a hotel is. I examined it. We looked for a hotel, we looked for a piece of real estate, we built our hotel, we did a classical opening, we took part in all the reservation portals and did all that. And then you look to see how people in Silicon Valley thinks. First of all, they build the platform before they start looking at the real estate or the other aspects to that. They build platforms, they create communities, and they generate a huge amount of data. Okay, let's think that further. Sooner or later, we look at the process. Look at Apple. They revolutionized the whole sector with the iPhone. Now they might decide they want to start building cars. Now, who's to say that Airbnb, with a market cap of, 20 million at the moment is their valuation? And Interconti's worth 7 million. So why shouldn't Airbnb now say, I'm going to create this huge platform with all this huge amount of data. I've got this top brand. Now I'm going to start buying a few hotels as an add-on. So my logical approach is different. I start with a platform and then I look to see what to do with it. They've got enough cash. If you look at head of hospitality at Airbnb, fantastic hotelier, they headhunted him, not just so that he could tell people where to put their ironing boards, but because he has a different way of approaching things. Joie de vivre, for example. He can manage hotels. So I have to go along and say, what's the big picture? What's behind this? What do people want? They've got the financial clout. They've got the resources. They can headhunt the best lobbyists, the best lawyers. They've got a lot of money. So the question is, which way do they want to go? It's the same with Booking.com. Again, you have a hotelier who runs a portal. You buy a system, fine. So before we face this development, which is really going to make us tear our hair out because you're going to get new distribution channels, new formats for everything. That's the way to go about it. Before we run out of time, I'd like to just look at the future, 10 years on, the crystal ball. Will there be hotels or will everything be run through Airbnb? Will there be big hotel chains? That's one question. And the other, at the moment, the feeling is, I know you take a different view of that, but at the moment there's a feeling that Airbnb is a phenomenon that is more a counterpart to budget hotels, and that's where the pressure is. If we look at a development whereby chains like Kempinski or Ritz-Carlton or whatever, that they start to suffer, is that likely to happen? And third question, business travelers hardly make use of these formats. That could change. Do you think a lot of frequent guests are going to be lost? Yeah, they're looking for a head of corporate travel now. And just let's ask them what the interface is between Concur and Airbnb. It's already a reality. And the future, Airbnb will become a hotel brand. And then there'll be business travel they will cater for. Someone showed us how to go about this a completely different way, and they can be big. I think that's the future. I think you just raised something very important there, which relates to strong monopolies. Big data means big costs. And I think that small hoteliers won't be able to afford what Marriott and Airbnb can afford. Or the big corporate players here, which are upgrading, re-equipping to deal with this. Airbnb have already said that they want to generate a product world where their clients are basically surveyed to make sure they get the right product at the right time, so that they can say, we have such sound knowledge of the clients in our pool that we know when they travel, what their preferences are, and so forth. Airbnb is a weird kind of mix between dating, because you can see potential partnerships, plus real estate. And that's something the hotel trade can't really afford to do. So their innovation plays a part. And I think what you're doing is really interesting, because that's about employees. Then it's not just about an abstract community which lives in some sort of virtual reality, but we're talking about people you can talk to in the hotel who have the social skills to converse with the guest. And there we are stumbling across our boundaries already. That's something we need to deal with. Will we get the youngsters we need for that business approach? Mr. Hartmann, could you be fairly brief so that we have an opportunity maybe to hear this or that question from the audience? Yes, well, as was mentioned before, I think phenomena like Airbnb will grow, but I think they will face tough competition. I think the OTAs are going to change radically because these voluntary chains and so forth are also going to enter the scene. I'm sure that's going to happen. I don't think it's the case that the hotel trade will have no answers. I don't believe that. So when we come into shared values and sharing value, of course, local communities is a big issue for the chains now. The move from corporate social responsibility towards creating shared value is tangible. But of course, there is a profit component to that. It's not just academic, it's not just abstract. We've carried out a lot of interviews at the college, and a lot of really good things have already been done. But this isn't being used by the chains for marketing, for what you call greenwashing, or to market their social responsibility. These are very different approaches. I think in the medium term, we'll see a lot of leverage there. We should not assume that people will lean back and say, oh, there's room for everyone. We're not going to get rid of Airbnb. There will be competition, but I'm sure we can cope with it. What the landscape will look like in 10 years, I can't tell you now, but the digital playground we have now has a huge impact, and we have to use it as a playground. There will be learning curves on both sides. Okay, so it's your turn. I can see someone at the back wanting to use the floor. Would you please use a microphone? My question is to Mr. Hartmann. I'm at the back. I think that training has been a bit ignored in the discussion. Hence my question to you. Do you think that the curriculum for students at top universities reflects sharing economies enough at top universities like Lausanne? I think it's right that at the moment, you've really hit the nail on the head. I think at the moment we are talking a lot about whether all the curricula in the world need adjusting. We're looking at the future and thinking about how the colleges have to respond, although I can't tell you at the moment what exactly we're doing. Mr. Pflaum. Yes, will you take a mic? What does the future look like? Could the answer for the hospitality trade be service design to enrich the stay of guests, but which calls for new kinds of employee with more skills and more sense of responsibility? Service as an intangible product has an opportunity to transmute into a material product. If I could say that, that's a perfect question. And in Geneva, we've responded to that with effective science, where we are trying, using scientific methods, to find out how innovations can be generated, what kind of innovations, how, and how do people respond, to try and create a framework so that we can see what's authentic, what's the cultural background, how important is design, because there are olfactory aspects here, smell, sound, live situations, precisely what you're talking about. But we'd like to include a scientific factor so that perhaps we can create a new tool set that might respond to the question how this lifestyle trend can be managed, and that includes everything from the building, the design, and so on. No, it looks as though you wanted to say something there. No, you're fine. Okay. Any more questions from the audience? That's not the case. Okay. No, we don't really have the time. I think as we want to finish on time, all those who have not asked a question do have their homework to do anyway, and of course the two who did. There is a TED survey, a question. I'm going to read it out. And you have those little electronic voting devices on your chair. And I want you simply, when I've asked you this question, I think you'll find it on the left at the top. Well, no, I'm a bit confused, sorry. You answer the question with yes or no, and there it is. If you agree with this statement that I might read, then press 1, and if you don't, press 2, and we'll see what happens. So, the question, does the hotel industry have a chance to retain its position despite the new sharing economy wave? So please vote now. Only optimists in the room. That is very reassuring, otherwise we'd have gone home depressed. I'd like to say thank you to all the panelists who discussed with me and to you for listening. And I would be really pleased if you have found some food for thought here. And I'm rather pleased that you came to this conclusion, but perhaps we can help you achieve it. Thank you very much.